So, hello, everybody. I am very excited to have my dear friend Ruth Cohn here for this podcast. Um, I have known Ruth for 25 years exactly, I think,
Mhm.
because I first met her in a sensory motor psychotherapy training in the year 2000 when I was still I think I wasn't teaching then. I think I was a fellow student.
No, you were an assistant. You were one of our brilliant
Oh,
assistants. You were better than the teacher.
well, thank you. And, and what I remember,
Don't tell.
I will,
Don't tell.
of course, everybody.
Yeah, but it's
And
true.
it's true. And I remember you were so dedicated because you flew from California to Boston every month for this training. And and these are, these are rigorous trainings.
Yeah.
And then I, the strong memory I have is probably, I'm going to say 2 or 3 years later, you shared a paper you'd written about couples with neglect and trauma. And it was the first time I'd ever seen neglect written about so clearly and differentiated so well from trauma. It blew my socks off. And,
Thank
and,
you.
and so,
Thank you.
so your work on neglect goes back a long, long, long way.
It does. It does.
Yeah,
Well, can I tell the story about how I encountered neglect?
sure.
Because it's actually an interesting story. Um, Back in the 90s, well, I started my practice in 1988. So we're old timers. And
Ah,
so in those days, sexual abuse of women and children was just starting to get talked about. And so people were coming out of the woodwork with sexual and abuse and incest stories. So my whole practice was adult women who had histories of childhood sexual abuse. That was pretty much my whole practice in the early 90s. And I came to discover that a lot of these women had partners, and there were lots of problems with sex and sexuality, and they all complained, my partner doesn't get it. My partner is pushing me for sex. I don't want to have sex. I can't have sex. I have flashbacks, all the stuff that we know about with sexual abuse survivors. So I had this brainy idea. Well, I will give 1-day workshops for male partners of women who were sexually abused in childhood. So in those days, we didn't have internet. So I made a little paper flyer. I put it in the mail. I put stamps on it. I sent it out and I waited. And I got a bunch of responses. And so I found myself in my little office in Oakland with 8 men and me. So here I was in this room with 8 men, and they were really interesting, attractive, accomplished, friendly, nice looking. There was one guy who was a physician. There was one guy who was an author of many books. There was one guy who was a contractor who built houses from scratch. They were all really, you know, interesting, nice, attractive, good, successful people. And so, of course, like we do in any grouping that's going to be together all day, we went around the group and I said, well, tell us something about yourself. And interestingly, every one of them, without exception, answered the question by talking about their wife. And I thought, wow, what is
it,
that? You, I ask you to tell me about you, and you answer by talking about someone else. So I asked them, well, what about you? And this is what caught my attention. They had this signature shrug that was like this. And they all said, well, nothing happened to me. And I thought, what
Hmm.
is this nothing? And I became very interested in nothing because
Yeah.
nothing is the theme that you hear about with neglect. But I didn't know anything then. I just got very curious, especially because I'd been hearing nothing but complaints about these guys, and they were doing everything. They were taking care of kids, they were schlepping people from here to there, they were making a living, they were not having sex, they were, they were perfect caretakers
Right.
and they had nothing to complain about themselves. So
Yeah.
that's how I began my curiosity about this.
Oh, that's
One
wonderful.
other thing I'll say about this group, one thing that I think is noteworthy, once these men, at the end of the day, they asked me, oh, can we have an ongoing group? And I said, sure, why not? So that became my little incubator for studying neglect. And that became their opportunity to learn about themselves and also begin to have a relationship, a reciprocal a relationship with other men. And that group, those
Hmm.
men stayed together and met regularly for 18 years.
Wow.
And I said, I'm getting old. I've got to end the group. I can't work this late at night. And they said, no, they said, we'll pay you more. We'll meet less often. But you can't end the group. So we went to every other week, but the group went on for 18 years.
That's
And that's
amazing.
where I started learning about neglect.
Right. Because nothing happened.
That's right. So my work is a whole lot of nothing. It's all about nothing because nothing is the problem. Neglect is the universe of nothing, of missing experiences.
Right. Right. And there's so many different kinds of missing experiences. That's
That's
the other
right.
thing that really strikes me.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one thing that was so very important to me from the trauma conference that we just had in Boston 2 weeks ago was one of the keynote speakers was an attachment researcher who I've been following her work for 30 years. Her name is Carlin Lyons Ruth. Not enough people have heard of her, but she's a brilliant Harvard psychology attachment researcher. She was one of the keynotes of the conference. I could not have paid her to do what she did because basically what she did was give the data, give the research legs, the evidence basis for everything I teach. Because she talked about how, and this is what I've been talking about the whole time, the base layer in the development of the infant brain and the infant self, the identity, is that early attachment experience. So if the mother is absent, the mother is lost. The mother withdraws. The mother abandons. The mother is disoriented, dissociated, like we see in so many of the clients that you work with, Janina, where they have this disoriented, dissociated, fragmented self, they cannot be present to the infant, the newborn. So the infant is reaching for the mother who is the source of all their attachment needs: food, water, shelter, warmth, protection from predators. We share this with all mammals. The
Right.
withdrawal of the mother, the absence of the mother, the disorientation of the mother is experienced by the infant as life threatening. So that infant has this dilemma without solution, which is of everything, the source of survival is simultaneously the source of lethal terror. And so the infant has this conflict that they can't resolve. And that is the template that identifies their orientation to relationship, first with the mother or the primary caregiver, and then it becomes their relationship template throughout the lifespan. One last thing before I
Yeah.
shut my mouth,
I
and that
just want to
is,
ask a question about it.
okay,
I,
one last thing, and then I'll stop. And that is, there is no there is no prefrontal cortex. There is no capacity for language, for narrative, for actually remembering a story. There is nothing. There's only sensory, emotional, somatic, imaginal, auditory, maybe olfactory perception that gets logged in
right.
memory. It's all implicit memory. So that child and that child, that infant, and then the child, and then no story. They have no narrative. So in their world, it's nothing. Nothing happened to them, which is true. There was nothing, but nothing is not nothing. And this is what I always say: nothing is not nothing. Nothing is something, and nothing matters. Nothing matters. So I'll hold there.
So my question was about the Carlin Lyons Ruth research. Uh, so what she report, I didn't hear her talk, so I'm so sorry I missed it.
I
Uh,
have the recording.
oh, great. So she basically found that the mothers who weren't there um also frightened their children. Very interesting because of course you know, her research and that of other long term attachment researchers have found this same finding with anything that frightens the child, but it wasn't clear that nothing was frightening. How cool. I mean,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
how cool for the children, but how cool that she was able to observe it,
yes.
document it.
Oh, yeah, because that is everything that I've been talking about for 25 years. And there was the evidence basis. That's exactly what I needed,
Right.
that I need, that sort of puts legs under it, evidence
Right.
basis. She also said, which I find really quite interesting and so important for us as clinicians or as humans, as parents, as teachers, as coaches, as, citizens of the world, is that this experience of neglect is infinitely transmissible,
Mhm.
which means the child who grows up with this diffuse attention most likely is going to bring the same kind of diffuse attention or inability to attend to their own children, which is really worrisome because we take these, and then this is another thing that I was so powerfully reminded of, that we work with our clients who have incident trauma to help them be present and to be, to be in their experience, and how essential it is that they bring that presence to their own children, because otherwise this invisible injury that has been so neglected in our field, and it continues to float around like a ghost, like nothing. Nobody sees it until we learn to look for it. It goes through the generations and it passes on and on and on.
It's an adaptation to the nothing that they had to survive. So, of
Yeah,
course, we
exactly.
learn to deal with nothing. You simply learned to be nothing. And,
Exactly.
and okay. So
Well, another thing that's really interesting, and this is what I'm once again, anecdotally, I have observed this, and because of myself, my own history, as well as what happens when I teach, and this is important to our audience, and that is so often after I teach or after I present or after somebody watches a course or a YouTube that I've done, they're clinicians or teachers or parents or coaches or social workers or physicians or whatever kind of caregiver they are. They come to me and they say, "Oh my God, that's me." And what Ruth verified, it's a very, very common adaptation that with these histories, we become caregivers, partly because it's a way for us to be close to people where we get a lot of sort of emotional intimacy, and we have no dependency on those people. Now, if we're clinicians that become dependent on our clients or our, patients or whatever our person that we're supposed to be helping, if we become dependent on them, there's something wrong there. But it's a way that we resolve the dilemma where we can have some semblance of attachment without the terror, which is not even conscious, of dependency. What I learned from Carlin Lyons Ruth is that, and we've seen this a lot with ourselves and also with kids that we see that start being caregivers when they're infants or children. I know when I was like 2 or 3, and my mother would say, "Oh, little Ruthie, she organizes the little ones. She has them marching around a tree." It was like I was taking care of my mother, from the start. And the reason why we categorically become caregivers in infancy is because it's a way of managing the terror. If I take care of the other, I'm a little safer. So the child learns to
right.
take care of the primary caregiver for their own safety. And I know this from my own mother, because she was a little on the OCD side. She was so anxious. And I knew if I scurried around and cleaned up the house, starting from, when I was little, and made as much order as I could, it was going to be better for me. She would be less irritable, less angry, less likely to lash out and take things out on me.
Regulator.
So I was running around cleaning. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yes. And
So if your
that's
people start
what
start recognizing themselves, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, what they found in the attachment research, that by the age of 2 to 3, subgroups of children with disorganized aka traumatic attachment, become what they call controlling caretaking. So they try to control the uncontrollable by being caretakers. And that's exactly what you did. Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing because it's it's before the age that you could think about it, right? It's
That's right. So these
early
people
thinking.
have no story. Their story is the story of nothing. So we have to teach people how to identify and reconstruct their story, not by making up a fiction. And some of us happened to live through the false memory syndrome, nightmare where people were accused of therapists and clients were accused of making up incest stories and villainizing parents. We're not doing that, but we're helping the client learn to reconstruct the story of nothing, which is no small feat.
Right. And and I think what you were saying earlier about we don't have memory for early attachment because we don't have brains capable of forming narrative memories. So so they have to I mean, ever all of us have to reconstruct our attachment story from how it's affected us. And
Yes.
and so,
And oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
so those implicit memories are are really the what's what's powerful. They have lots of memory. They just don't have it verbally.
That's correct. And what we find, and this is what I've learned over these long years of trial and error, because there was no literature that I could find about how to work with these problems. So
Mhm.
I began to ask people, so what do you know about what was going on in your mother's life when she was pregnant with you? What do you know about what was going on in your mother's life when you were an infant? And so then I'll begin to get information like, oh, well, when my mother was pregnant with me, she had recently lost a child. So she had a miscarriage before me. And then when she was about maybe 6 weeks or 2 months pregnant, her beloved mother died in a car accident. So you're beginning to get the picture of high stress during pregnancy. Now, back to Carlin Lyons Ruth research, what she said or I'm not sure if I read it in her work, if I heard it from her, or if I read it in Alan Shore or Jaak Panksepp's work, but one of them, because I'm constantly reading and studying this stuff. When the mother during pregnancy is having a lot of stress and the infant, well, what's going into the fetus through the placenta is this high level of stress hormones.
Right.
So the cortisol level in the mother is high. So it's permeating the placenta. It's going into this developing fetus. And what do we get? We get an enlarged amygdala in the fetus. Now, what is the amygdala? We're all familiar with the amygdala from trauma work. The amygdala is the alarm bell, the fear detector of the brain. So when the amygdala is enlarged, that means the fear detection system is already on high alert before they're even born. So
Wow.
this kid is born scared.
That's amazing. Right. Or born ready to be scared. Right.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Wow.
So we reconstruct the story from the mother's pregnancy. And I've heard so many stories from people who come in and say, well, nothing happened to me. Then you find out that during the pregnancy, the mother was in prison. The mother was separated from the father in prison. And nothing happened to you? This person didn't even know if he was born in prison or after the parents got out of prison.
Right.
And you can imagine what two parents who have
Yeah,
been in
talk about
prison
stress hormones.
separately.
Yeah. Yes, yes. No absence of stress hormones in prison.
Right. So then what was going on in your mother's life when you were an infant? Well, my father was drinking. He was gone a lot. He was cheating. She was so upset. She had too many kids and no help. I was like the fifth of six, seven kids, and my mother had all these toddlers running around and no one helping her, and she was completely overwhelmed. I mean, you begin to construct the context that this child was born into. And as they reconstruct their mother's story, they start to get more memory from when they were 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you can bet that after this mother who was absent for whatever reason probably had her own trauma or poverty or racism or not enough food or you name it. But the child then is vulnerable to be hurt and have incident trauma on top of their neglect trauma. So they go to therapy thinking that the sexual abuse is the problem when they have this base layer that Carlin Lyons Ruth says, and this is what I've been saying for 25 years, but without evidence, that this is the most severe, profound kind of trauma that there is because it comes so early and
Yeah,
so before any of this other developmental, equipment is even there, and
right,
it leaves its mark on the relationship template where that pattern of relationship becomes like the cookie cutter for all relationship throughout their lives. So then you layer on top of that the incident trauma, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the bullying, the violence, the war, whatever is on top of it. And you've got, what you see, Janina, which is these highly fragmented people who think what the problem is what happened. And the underlayer of nothing stays invisible and unacknowledged.
right, right, right. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so, I mean, it's amazing. And I basically believe that if working on event trauma makes no sense, that it's
Yeah.
really that the work is about these implicit memories and that giant-sized amygdala because
Yeah.
it's not going to shrink. Right?
Yeah, that's right. And the way it really shows up most profoundly, and people suffer, as we all know, more than anything from this, which is they can't make relationship work. And they have this sort of deep-seated unconscious terror of dependency and attachment. So we get all these aberrations of attachment, including with us, because they're so help and you can use the term help resistant, which I really don't like because it sounds intentional. It's not, it's survival. They
Right.
are so
It's a
terrified
phobia.
of needing another person
Mhm,
that they reject any kind of dependency, including us. So
mhm.
it's very hard to help them, to keep them, and we have to have the humility and the compassion and the tenacity and the resilience and the patience and the hope to
And you know what, Ella?
stay in it because
We also have to,
go on,
and
what were
this
you
is
going to say?
hard, this is hard for therapists, um, because we have to be able to tolerate the nothing.
That's
And
right. And
men,
including,
most
oh, go ahead.
in our field, the tendency is to call these men, uh, which I have to say are probably the majority, um, a neglected group, ironically, in this arena. We call them avoidant. We sort of, right, as if they were deliberately not in touch with themselves and their
Yeah,
history. And I
that's
really,
true. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I have a problem. I really have a problem with that. And that's why I love the idea of nothing. Because if if they could, if there was something that they could hold on to, they could talk about it. I'm sure they could talk
Yeah,
about their work and even their marital relationships, um, or their relationships. But but it's they if they're called avoidant, then we sort of try to force them to feel something rather than relate to them where they are. And I think that's what
yeah.
you're communicating that is so helpful for therapists. Is there's a
I
lot they
do want to say something about gender, though, Janina, because this is something that I've recently been learning about that is it's been really opening my mind. And I'm going to be talking about this in Oxford because I'm so compelled by it that I've begun to really pursue it. Sidebar, we live in San Francisco where there's a lot of sexual nonconformity here, including trans. Anyway, so I came across this research by Alan Shore. And if you don't know Alan Shore, he was one of the people who really sort of blew my mind open with his book in 1994 about attachment and development. And it's hard work to read, which is why one of the things I like to do and I kind of take pride in is reading his article like 100 times and translating it into language and concepts that I can teach people because it's so hard to understand him directly. But here's what I learned from him, which once again is one of these invisible, important pieces of information that I didn't know about, and I've been in this field for a very long time. This data goes back to 1945 when we got the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. And what they saw in Hiroshima in 1945, that's a long time ago, it's more than 100 years ago, um, is that post trauma, post bomb, the boys suffered more, had more protracted stress and trauma symptoms, were more difficult to soothe and comfort and, help than the girls. So they began to study gender differences in the brain. And Ellen Shore wrote this paper that I recently found and read. It's in 2017. Why did I not know any of this stuff? It goes back to 2017, which is why I am like teaching it now. So if you go to Oxford, you'll hear it there. But here's what Alan Shore teaches us, that the male brain, beginning in utero, develops more slowly than the female brain.
Right.
Starting in utero, from birth, male infants, male brains are more sensitive and more vulnerable. Infant girls are born right from birth. They smile more. They respond to attachment cues from the mother more, the mother's voice, the mother's gaze, the mother's touch. They're more receptive to it. They need less regulation. They learn to self regulate more easily. It's easier for them to calm down after they get upset, dysregulated. Infant girls are infinitely easier to take care of. The infant boys from birth, they grimace more, they fuss more. And Alan Shore is a man, so he's not mincing words here.
Right.
And they cry more, they're less receptive to the attachment cues. They need more in the way of regulation. They're less able to utilize it. They're less able to self regulate. Their trauma symptoms are more pervasive, more lasting, more resistant to processing. So, long story short, infant boys are harder to take care of. So, you've got a traumatized mother with too many kids, or she's already at the end of her wits, whatever little bit she has to offer. If she has a difficult infant, she's going to be less patient, less drawn to comfort that child who is so much harder to comfort,
Right.
less
Or she'll
able.
just be gone with a baby who needs more there or
Exactly. So,
something. And
so
then,
the problem with males being able to self regulate, have emotional intelligence, be able to really be present, be in relationship. It's not only social, it's also organic. It starts in utero.
right. Right. Which is really, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
And I'm a straight woman, so, this is important for me to learn in terms of really correcting our lens about men.
Right. Right.
And
And
go ahead,
our
go ahead.
expectations for men.
And an additional piece, and the way I got interested in this in the first place, and this is what I'm going to talk about in Oxford, is that, we got this intense Me Too movement. Everyone was coming out of the woodwork with these stories of sexual assault. And of course, I have my own sexual abuse history, plenty of it. And I also have been working with sexual abuse, since the beginning of my therapy career. So I was really once on one hand on board with the whole population of Me Too people, but I became very curious. And the icon of the Me Too movement is Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby, if you look at him, if you take a little closer look at Bill Cosby, he was on top of the world. He had money, he had fame, he was loved. He broke into a white dominated market. He was loved by all kinds of people. Bill Cosby could have sex with anyone he wanted to. So, why would he need to have sex with unconscious women? Why on earth would he need to drug women to have sex with him. And so I began to look at some of these other icons of the Me Too movement, and I began to ask the question, what is wrong with these men?
Mm.
We've got to take this problem upstream. Something's wrong with these men. Bill Cosby, Bill Clinton, what's his name?
Harvey Weinstein.
Nasser. All, yeah, all these people who are on top of their game and they're perpetrating all over the place. What's wrong with them? So I began to study their histories to see, well, what happened to them or what didn't happen to them?
Mm.
So I know our time is short, Janina. So I'm going to hold there and let you sort of do what you need to do to wrap up. And I'm sorry I talked so incessantly and didn't
You're
give you
so
much
passionate
time.
about you're so passionate about your subject. It's
I
wonderful
am.
to
I
listen to
am.
you. So so we have to ask those questions. And I think instead of assuming people are avoidant, we have to ask, and instead of being so interested in the something that happened, we have to be interested in the something that didn't happen.
Exactly. Exactly. To really begin to learn to look between the lines and find out more. And I know I always felt invisible, unimportant, non existent, like I couldn't believe I existed in the eyes of the other if I wasn't in their sight, including my therapist, who I saw 4 days a week. I didn't think she remembered me from one day to the next. That's what they expect. They don't expect, my parents didn't know my friends' names. So why would this stranger remember what I told them yesterday? I did not expect that. So looking for that, this hypersensitivity to what they hear as criticism, rejection, the imagined abandonment. These are some of the things that give us a clue that there is nothing there.
Right. Oh, Ruth, thank you so much. And and thank you for being the voice of everyone who's experienced nothing.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
wonderful.
it's my pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me. And my rallying cry is nothing is not nothing. Nothing is something, and nothing matters.